in there, tired, but but
Yeah.
going.
Yeah, there's a lot of, I'd say, topics in your sphere happening right now. I reached out to you earlier to ask you about this Democrat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, because that was from, I think that was a couple weeks ago she said that, but it was making the rounds yesterday. And I was reading more about her. And for those who don't know, Jasmine Crockett is a Democrat Congresswoman from Texas. And she was saying in this clip from this long interview where she goes, we need to get back to normal topics. We need to get back to what is important to the American people and, get back to the basics. And the first thing she brings up is how there's no such thing as men and women's sports and that there's no problem with illegal immigration because of how much, I guess, sales tax it brings in. And I just thought, at this point, Jennifer, you literally just have to not look into it at all, because the stories that I write about are about 1/3 about what I read about guys and girls sports in high school, middle school, college, and sometimes professional. Is it just taking people not actually looking into it to avoid it at this point?
Well, I think there's a couple things. First of all, Jasmine Crockett and the Democrats are obviously incorrect that this doesn't matter to the American people. Many people voted on this particular issue. It's often said that Trump's most successful ad leading up to the campaign was the one that said, Kamala's for they, them, and he's for you. So people do care about it. They're pissed off on the Dem side that they're not able to set the agenda and tell Democrats what they're supposed to be upset about and supposed to believe in. They're also lying because, to your point, there's a site called shewon.org. I think it's up to over 1,000 instances of males stealing team bursts and trophies from women. And this is all just accelerating in the last few years. So, the Dems' approach is to say this isn't happening. Then when you show them that it is happening, they say, well, it's happening and it's a good thing. And this is very social justice-y and it's inclusion-y. And so, we love that this is happening, even though they just said it's not happening. So, or they say it's rarely happening, not true. And so why are you all up in arms about this? They're just sort of dismissing what Americans are saying they care about, and we care about this. I would just say back to Jasmine and anyone who said it's not really happening that often. Well, what's an appropriate number of times? Do you have a number? Is 1,000 enough? Because that's happened. 2,000? What's the right number that we get to care about boys stealing women's, girls' opportunities? I think one is too many, and the American people agree with me. So they're lunatics. But that's not the worst thing she said, Andrew, in the last few weeks. I think isn't she the one that said, called Governor Abbott Governor Hot Wheels?
Yes, she called him Hot Wheels, and she's also putting on this accent people have shown. I love when that happens. Hillary Clinton did it. Obama did it, where they put on this fake accent.
Preacher.
Where they were, she had preacher parents, went to a private school, and now she's, talking with a very urban accent, which she didn't appear to have before. And she called them Hot Wheels at the Human Rights Campaign, which is supposed to be, inclusive of all.
And they cheered at HRC. Yeah. And then she tried to excuse it with some really dumb tweet about how she was referring to the fact that he's removing immigrants on wheeled vehicles. Sure, that's what you meant.
The speed at which this stuff is happening now, I think, is insane compared to nothing happening, I guess. But the Portland race, which was high school, happened just a few days ago, and they've already opened an investigation into that school district. Are you surprised at how fast things are happening now? Obviously, I think I'm fair in saying that you're pleased by it, as I am. Are they doing that on their own? Do you have any insight onto that? Or are people now being like, hey, these are people you can turn to and have a direct channel on these sorts of events?
You mean is the White House active?
With the administration.
Well, look, when Trump signed the executive order back, gosh, when was it at this point? February, some point in February, he said that he will enforce it and states that do not adhere will risk losing federal funding. I mean, he said it when he signed it. And that's why the Department of Education, that is how the Department of Education has functioned for many, many years. Ironically, now the Dems are against it, but that's what they do. They say you adhere to this strict set of policies or you lose federal funding. Now they're all hysterical that he's actually doing that. But almost every deep blue state is flouting the executive order. And they're saying, well, we're going to adhere to our own laws, but federal law trumps the state law. And they're saying it's not, that their state law is different and allows for trans identified males to compete in women's sports, and that they are adhering to the law. They're not adhering to federal law because federal law is the executive order, which is basically the original Title IX. So we've seen it in Maine, as you stated, Oregon. We're seeing it in California. We're seeing it in Illinois. Basically just name your blue state, and none of them are adhering. And it remains to be seen. I think Maine's deadline is up today, if I'm not mistaken, to say that they will adhere. One university in Maine, the Maine University, the biggest, I think, primary university in Maine has already said that they would, but that's just one university. That's not the entire university, state-funded university system, and that's not K through 12. I care about middle school and high school because that's where we're seeing this unfairness really come to bear. So it remains to be seen what Maine does. I think if they concede, that's going to set a standard. If they say that they will adhere to the executive order, yes, I'm glad that he's using, this is the law, adhere to the law or risk losing funding. That seems eminently fair and reasonable to me.
The Portland Regional, whatever district, the school district that this happened in, I read the entire policy they had on this, and it was very strange. You have to wonder who the adults are that put this together and say, this makes sense, guys, let's go forward with that. So a student can declare a new gender every year. The rule was that you can't compete in two different genders for sports
in the same year.
In the same year, but 4 times in high school you could flip back and forth if you want, or in elementary school. And then on top of that, it just says whenever they say that they are a different gender, that is what they are. But also for non-binary students, they're allowed to say whenever, whatever gender they are, and that also has to be adhered to. So you literally have contradicting rules within your rule set based on, like, why wouldn't all those kids who want to do it just say I'm non-binary? Then they could just be anything at any time. But then they still have to go year by year. It doesn't really make any sense.
Well, first of all, once a male decides to compete in women's, he's not going to go back in the other direction because he won't qualify for the team and he won't win any awards. And that's what we've seen with these noted cases in both Oregon as well as California and Maine, is that, these athletes competed in the boys division. They did not make the podium. In some instances, they literally were coming in last, and they switched to girls and women's, and they are now winning, and they are finding themselves atop the podium. And if you took their same times that secured them first place within women's and applied those times to men's, they wouldn't have even, made the team or made the cut. They would have come in last. So, no dissing to girls. This is why we have girl sports, but yeah, it's a total clown car. I mean, what is going on? And it's just so deeply narcissistic that it's like, I get to change my mind every other day and you have to keep up with me. You have all these things to do, primarily teach the kids in the classroom, but you have to remember every child's distinct and ever-changing pronoun set. I mean, give me a break. It's so stupid. It defies belief. And I really do have every confidence that at some point in the future, we will look back on this time as one of the dumbest times in history, but we are not. That day has not yet come.
Yeah, the CEO or CIO of this investment firm I spoke to the other day, he said this will be known as the era of corporate penance, where companies and I guess in this case, school boards are really just adhering to what is being told to them in order to be like, please, sir, can I have some more? Please let me. And then what happens is
self-flagellation. Yeah.
4 years go by, then you have to do it the other way well, it's just going to keep going back and forth. So one of the people I spoke to Robbie Starbuck. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's attacking all the DEI stuff. He said what he's been doing is literally telling these companies, just be normal again. Just be boring and don't have anything. And I think that's what people are really asking for. Like, why does the school board need to have an opinion? Again, this Portland one had stuff about sexual orientation in there. Like, what does that have to do with sports at all if the kid's gay or straight or anything?
The San Francisco Teachers Union, I'm going back a few years, so just pardon me. I think it was in 21 or 22, were the first teachers union in the country to announce their rejection of Israel and that they were joining the boycotts, of any Israeli-made goods. The schools weren't even open in San Francisco. It was still COVID. And this is what the teachers union is meeting on, to make a big declaration that they're rejecting the idea that Israel has a right to exist. Stop it. The kids they're falling hopelessly behind. You're refusing to go back to school. How about focusing on that? So I completely agree with Robbie, just be normal. And I do worry some that the response to what we're seeing now, if it swings so far in the opposite direction, that could go any number of ways, but I hesitate to say this, but I'll just say it. I like you. It could go to this really rigid reinforcement of traditional gender roles, and this very, frankly, conservative notion of a woman's place being in the home and not working and not ambitious, but really kind of built back around these that sex is binary and you need to go do that, which is what you were born to do, young woman. And I've never been a proponent of, the wave of feminism that I grew up in was about expansive notions of gender roles. And I don't even like the word gender anymore, but that's why I grew up believing that I could do anything and I could compete in sports and I could win and I could be an ambitious and aggressive girl and put those things to use in the world to do good. I don't want us to go backwards there.
Have you found that women that are sort of anytime they hear some of these buzzwords, they're just I don't want anything to do with it? Because I know women that have said, and both people I've seen say online and women that I know have said, I don't even know if I want women being in government anymore. If I'm being completely honest, I've heard at least half a dozen women say this.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, I see that conversation online. I can't say that I know people that have said these things to me directly, but I definitely see it in corners of the, social media landscape. And, I find that kind of alarming. Obviously, I'm not a proponent of that. I think that I still consider myself a feminist, which many women on the right and the left reject. The reason I do is because I think it's just about basic, fairness and equality of opportunity. I think women deserve to be paid equally for equal work. That doesn't mean we should have access to every single type of job. Ones that require extreme physical strength, we're probably not able to perform them on par with men. But for equal work, we should get paid the same. We should be able to vote and own property and not need the permission of our husbands to, have a credit card. That's all I mean. And, when I say that, even in a room full of very conservative young women, they're like, yeah, of course, we agree with that too. We might make a different choice for ourselves and that, we want to have a more traditional relationship. But we totally believe in your right to, do it the way you're doing it. So I don't know anyone that's saying that, but you're right. I do know it exists. And I think there is this burgeoning hyper conservative movement that's positing women need to go back home in the kitchen and just have babies. And I'm like, oh God, if that's the response to where we are now, that's a problem.
Well, yeah, for years people were saying that it's going to swing ultimately very far in the other direction. And I think you're seeing that at least being proposed in almost every category. I know there's a certain sect of content creators, let's call them, who will just think you're gay if you won't say the N-word or something on the air, something like that. That's what their argument will be. Oh, you don't want to say this, you don't want to say that, then I can't trust you. And it's okay, well, you have fun I guess whenever being employed or something. But but for most people, there's a difference. And I said this to somebody once. They said, you can't say whatever you want on your podcast because you won't say this. And I said, no, I can say whatever I want. You just don't want me to say certain things. That's the difference. Yeah. And there is a degree of self-censorship that people have to have when they work at big companies. But I've worked at companies where that exists and you can feel it. And I work at a company now where there's no notion of that, to the best of my knowledge, and I definitely don't feel it. So when people, there is this trend, I will say, because I don't pay attention to the exact inner workings of how leftist circles work, so I can say on the right side, there is this trend, and particularly with guys who are like in their lower to mid 20s, who say, if I don't adhere to this like new cool guy trend of the content creators that I like, then they're not going to think I'm cool, whether it's like having certain positions or becoming a certain religion or something, or disavowing whatever. And I just think it goes back to that being really lame no matter what it is. Like, I've been calling this cartoon thing on the last couple days online lame. Like, isn't this supposed to be things that you're against, like lame online trends that people fall for, like save the Amazon, and then you're just like, no, I have to do it too. I need to be included.
Yeah.
Very negative.
Yeah. I mean, I think there is a trend, and I don't think it's a burgeoning one. I think it's, no secret that there's this like actual trend on the internet, especially amongst very young men, like the ones you're talking about, who are just, favoring and loving the Andrew Tates of the world, which is in fact actual toxic masculinity. Like, if there is a real thing as toxic masculinity, I would say it is the positions that he furthers in terms of how he thinks women deserve to be treated and the role they should play in the world and how he treats them. And in some sense, which I think is really unfortunate, that is the inevitable outcome of the left screaming that all men are toxic for the last 10 to 15 years. Boys and young men can't listen to that forever and not respond and with equal and opposite force. And now, unfortunately, I think it's been created as a response to this just relentless haranguing and dismissing and belittling boys and men, unfortunately. So I do think we have to be careful of that hither and yon and that swinging to and fro. And I think Robbie is correct. Just be normal. And, if I were to bring it back to my brand, people would say, well, you're not being normal with XXXY athletics. Well, yeah, I am actually. You're trying to paint us as, these like fascist, far right, authoritarian lunatics. All we're saying is men and women are different. Like, that's a pretty normal thing to say. That's a pretty normal.
I did talk to him about that, about how he feels, and this is just gonna be an interview talking about another interview, but how does one feel when they're pushing towards this stuff, when they're pushing towards normalcy, let's say, and the other guys or girls on the other side can say, well, you're pushing something too. But I think it ultimately comes down to what is actually correct, and people need to be confident in things that are obviously correct and not let people sway them for that. There's something
I think that's right. Go ahead. No, I think that's right. I mean, you can frame it however you want. You can say I'm a fascist, alt-right authoritarian for saying sex is real, men and women are different. But I'm sorry, that's a statement of fact. And I don't care how you frame it. I'm going to keep saying it. And at some point, the world will not be insane anymore. And we'll all come back to kind of what we knew 5 minutes ago or 5 years ago. And I think when it comes to Robbie, what he's saying is in corporate America, we need to come back to a system of merit where the employees that deliver and perform the best are the ones that are rewarded. And, for a large company in particular, sort of putting out content that appeals to the highest common denominator and is unifying, not divisive, that should be the goal. And that's what's good for business, not to mention creating a culture inside companies where free speech, creativity, that leads to innovation. So this culture of fear that's been propagated is really bad. This is what I've been saying. I don't know if Robbie talks about it, but it's really bad for American business. If everybody's terrified to speak, how are you going to come up with some kind of innovative new concept, which is usually a group effort? So I agree with you. I think just because they paint us as non-neutral doesn't mean we're not fact-based.
It's true. I just think that in the spirit of self-reflection, I think people need to remember that sort of stuff. Something I
Yeah.
pulled up earlier that I wanted to ask you about is the Major League Baseball took their DEI stuff off their website, and I read a few articles on it, and they were just terrible articles. And I know last time we talked about this sort of stuff from a male perspective, you asked me, but the women who wrote about it for The Atlantic, who were defending these DEI policies for Major League Baseball, where they'll hire people in the front office based on their race or being a woman. I wanted to ask you, like, oftentimes women are included in that. Is that weird for you, being a woman? And my second part of that question is, like, you're just so strange and like. And then my second question is, like, I will divulge that these were two white women that wrote this, so they are generally seen as lower on the rung of intersectionality. What inspires young women to want to be like, let me go into that field and just be like, I'm terrible, replace me in my job, and if I don't agree with this, I think I'm a piece of crap too.
Wow, there's a lot in there. I don't really pay much attention to baseball, but it sounds stupid. The article, whatever it is or was. Look, by every metric, girls and young women are ahead of young men at this point. They're graduating from high school at higher rates. They're graduating from college at higher rates. They're getting advanced degrees at higher rates. I'm sure there's other metrics. Now, has that played itself out in the corporate environment yet? I think a very small fraction of CEOs are women. I think it's like 2%. It's definitely under 5% at Fortune 500 and 1,000 companies. But look, if girls are beating boys in every metric, it's going to happen. And I think there's no doubt that, so I'll just leave it at that. No, I don't, certainly not in the last, I'll say 10 to 15 years. I haven't felt being female was a disadvantage in the corporate environment. My big mouth is perhaps a disadvantage. But that's just me. I do think it's important to acknowledge, growing up in the 90s as a young woman in corporate America, it wasn't great. There were some definitely like difficult times, drunken sales guys that you had to kind of bat away. There were men in senior positions who definitely were inappropriate. And if you didn't flirt with them, you pretty much got ignored. And, there goes any promotion you might get because somebody was always willing to do it. But that has changed dramatically in the last 15 years. And I just always refused to participate in that. And as I moved up the ladder, I was like, I'm just going to create a different environment, and I did, certainly on my team. And I think anyone would be hard pressed to find that in a corporate environment at this stage. Although I dare I say it, because you're going to have some horrible Harvey Weinstein type situation come out again soon. But no, I don't think we women should be whining and claiming that we deserve, DEI status. Work your ass off, earn it. You'll get it based on merit. That's all. If you love baseball and you want to work for the MLB as a woman, I guess go do it. Like I don't know any woman on earth that
Well, my point was kind of that they were just, they're in there. They're writers. They're not. I don't think maybe they'd like to work for the MLB, but they're just arguing for this thing that kind of has nothing to do with them. And yes, some of the programs did say women involved too, but I don't think there's this huge like embargo on women in sports media. I really don't think there is. In fact, it's more than ever to a degree that people don't want, but they're just sort of coming out in defense of like people that aren't them and being like, look how hard they have it. And even if it's discriminatory to myself, I'm going to keep pushing it because, I don't know where like all that comes from in their lives.
I don't know. I mean, I say this as a member of this group, but like white women are the biggest effing problem on the planet with all of this shit right now. I'm like embarrassed, honestly. Call them Karens, call them whatever you want, but they are the biggest proponents of all of this nonsense. They love disavowing their privilege. They love all of it. They love disavowing privilege and recycling and reparations. And, it's just like,
recycling will get you every time.
yeah, I mean, that NPR lady, the CEO of NPR, Catherine Marr, I don't know if you saw all of her antics this week. She's sort of like the prototypical white woman, in my opinion. I want nothing to do with these people. I want to work hard and be recognized for how I contribute and, what I deliver into the world, not because I whine the loudest and, disavow my privilege the hardest. Look, a woman just got elected head of the International Olympic Committee. This is arguably the most powerful sport governing body. She was elected over the person I wanted, who was Sebastian Coe,
Right.
who is one of the most decorated, well, probably the most decorated athletes out of the UK ever. She's sort of a no-name. I didn't know who she was. She won handily. I don't know what her views are, but, this is a woman that got elected to the highest spot in the most powerful organization in sport. I don't know. What are you complaining about?
That Sebastian Coe guy just announced the World Athletic Association is having the gender testing. And that reminds me, I forgot to ask you about the big dog, Amin Khalif. Holy, I forgot about him. It was like a week ago. He said, try to stop me from defending my gold medal at the next Olympics in America. What's your take on that? How is that still going? Why do you think this charade is still going? I'll preface it so maybe you can, whatever you say won't seem as extreme. I think Algeria is where she's from. Algeria, Morocco, Algeria.
Algeria.
Yeah. I think they're embarrassed that they didn't know that they had a guy competing as a woman, which they would be fundamentally against as an Islamic nation, and they cannot break with the storyline here. We've got two different organizations, Cenk Uyghur and such, say, they're Russian, you can't trust I think it was the IAB.
Yeah.
And then the second organization, and then the endocrinologist, and also just watching Amin Khalif box. As soon as I saw him box, I was like, that's a guy. Like, he moves like a guy. There's very few female athletes that can move like a guy in that sense. And
yeah, I have. Yeah, no, he's a guy. I mean, I have a couple things on this. I believe, and to be clear, despite that Trump gets this one a little bit wrong, I don't think Imani Khalif is trans. Imani Khalif was born with a difference in sex development, and I believe in Algeria he was actually thought to be a girl until he went through puberty, at which point, and this is pretty well documented, that he has this DSD called, I think 5ARD is how you say it, 5ARD. And at that point, if I could be slightly graphic, when he went through puberty, he would not menstruate. So that's proof of not being a girl. But he also would have his testicles drop, and he would have his penis actually grow and appear, although probably a tiny one. But that is what it is. So at a certain point, Imani Khalif and his parents did get back in frame. At a certain point,
pronouncing his name wrong, Imani.
I think it's Imani Khalif. So at a certain point, it became clear that this was a boy, just like Caster Semenya, who has famously said, who has been banned now from running track and field because it's clear that Caster Semenya is male. And there's a famous quote from Caster Semenya saying, just because I have testicles, that doesn't make me less of a woman. Well, it sure does. It actually does. And he has fathered several children. So I think they did know at a certain point. There is some evidence. I don't want to kind of go out on too big of a limb here, that in some of these sort of developing countries, there are scouts that actually go and look for male athletes born with DSDs who present as female, to recruit them into women's sports, because they will help these small countries secure gold medals. Some of these athletes are on UK soccer teams. Some of the best quote unquote women's soccer players in the world are actually men.
Is that the Gambian one you're referring to, or do you know any specific?
Barbara Banda, I think is the name. There's three. So I think Khalif knows he's male. I think his parents know he's male. I think the country knows he's male, but It doesn't matter. He won. He was probably raised as a girl till he went through puberty. So I actually have a lot of empathy. That would really suck to think you were a girl and then find out you're not a girl. So I think it's complicated, but it is what it is. And they just went with it. Well, we raised you a girl, so let's just keep going. And now you're winning. So this is great. And you're bringing glory to Algeria. So we get to celebrate you. As far as the governing bodies, I think it remains to be seen what Kirsty Coventry, the new head of the IOC, is going to do. She has said publicly she is going to be pretty aggressive on this of not allowing trans identified males in women's sports. She hasn't talked about DSDs, but you'd have to group that in. It remains to be seen what she will do and if she will adopt sex testing like Sebastian Coe has just done. And if so, then, game over, lights out, Amani, unless you want to compete in men's.
And a lot of people, I should say politicians, pretend as if they always say, the gender checks involve like dropping trow and everything, and you're going to have men testing young girls. Like the two methods that are obviously the least intrusive are a blood test and a cheek swab, because it's literally just your DNA. They look at it under a microscope. It's pretty basic, even for a moron like me. It's pretty easy to conceptualize that they're looking under a microscope for DNA.
And they only do it once. You do it once. You could even just spit in a cup. Like, they don't even have to put something in your mouth if that's too invasive. You could spit in a cup and they could know, and that would be on record forever. And by the way, all the like crazy people like AOC who are screaming about this meaning genital checks, it's a total lie, but it's an effective lie because a lot of Americans think that. It's so dumb, it's beyond belief. For people that think a cheek swab is invasive, guess what you have to do to test for drugs in every high-level competition? You have to pee in a cup in front of a person. So they make sure it's your actual pee. If you are a wrestler or a boxer, you weigh in front of a whole committee to make sure that you made weight. I don't think that's what's required, because there are categories in sports. So, this is probably the least invasive test that an athlete headed to the Olympics will have to take. A cheek swab or a spit test.
Yeah, saying you have testicles and saying you're a woman, it's time's up on that, let's say. Strong, powerful woman that fathered some kids. Can you expand a bit on the people recruiting individuals with these, intersex, what can we call them, conditions? Has somebody told you about that? Is that just
people have told me? It's not a theory of mine. Journalists have told me this. Like I said, this is I don't know if it's true. It sounds feasible, and it sounds, look, there's so few males with these sorts of DSDs that are born presenting as female. And there seems to be an inordinate amount, because it wasn't just Imani Khalif. There was the other boxer too. I can't remember. The
Filipino or Thai?
Yeah.
Filipino.
Yeah.
I knew he was going to win, by the way, as well. As soon as I saw him, I watch a lot of fighting. And as soon as I saw how these guys can move, I was like, that's weird. As a person who watches a lot of fights, I was like, that person moves like a guy, and then you go and you find out that they're accused of being a guy. And when I can think of like 3 UFC fighters in my lifetime that can move like that, which are confirmed women, you start to like put these pieces together. Yeah,
it just seems like there's an inordinate amount. There's 2 that won gold at the Olympics in one event, boxing. 2. That's a high number of the gold medals in women's boxing. Yeah. There's a decent number. I think there's actually 3 in global soccer organizations. And they're all from Africa or developing nations within Africa, and it feels suspicious to me. That said, I don't want to say that this is necessarily true. I would love for a journalist or somebody smarter than me to really, really dig deep into this, but it feels disproportionate. There's a lot.
I did a story on this. That's why I'm looking down. I'm not being rude. I'm searching.
And then, of course, Caster Semenya is the other one, which is the, famous one.
I did a story on this about how many transgender people there were in the last Olympics. could be hard to find because it was last year. 600 female athletes. Aaliyah Thomas. The stuff I go through. Amain Khalif. Amane, my apologies.
Mm-mm. You could be right. I could totally be wrong. I have no idea
mean,
how to say his name.
I've just never thought about it. It was something, I think it was like 25. I'm having trouble finding it here for some reason.
Are you combining trans and these DSD athletes?
Yes, I
Yeah.
was. And because that's why I remember the soccer players, because there was two of them on one team, and I think they were Ghanan, and they had been suspended from, I should really look this up. We can bring this up next time. But they were suspended, I think, from their league because they were found to be, people thought they were men. And then they said they did tests, and then they say, oh, they basically just swept it on the rug. They didn't really have a conclusive, and they were brought back in for the international competitions. I believe that's what happened.
Yeah, I think there's three. I think they might all be out of the UK, and I think they're all from various African countries. And one of them, the Banda, won UK footballer of the year, women's footballer of the year last year, which is insane. So, but if I go back to on the boxing front, I think again we're all anxiously awaiting what Kirsty Coventry, the head of the IOC, is going to do, and there will be a new organization taking over world boxing. Just to be clear, so the IAB before the Olympics. So IAB, the organization that you were referring to, was kind of ousted by the IOC for corruption, which is ironic because the IOC is one of the most corrupt organizations there is. But they were. And so boxing was managed directly by the IOC at this last summer Olympics, the International Olympic Committee. That was meant to be a temporary solution. There are individual sport governing bodies for each sport that set their own rules, unless the IOC says we're having one blanket rule. So there's going to be a new governing body for boxing, and I think that they will not allow. I think they will require sex testing, and I think Mr. Khalif will find out the hard way that he's not going to be allowed to fight in women's next Olympics.
I find it odd that the Olympics doesn't. I guess it's easier because the other organizations are already established, but with all the money they have, you would think they would just develop their own testing committees for everything, but they default to existing organizations, I believe, for everything. And that's why boxing didn't have one, because they didn't trust the Russians anymore, because they're mean, and there was some sort of controversy with the guy. Isn't the guy who's head of it was a Bulgarian, I think? I don't remember, but they basically went with no testing because they discredited the other.
Yeah. I mean, the Olympics up until 2000 tested for sex, and then they stopped, I think partly because of all this political nonsense. Generally speaking, the way sports governance works is they all do this, and they're like, well, we're not going to decide, you decide. Well, we're not going to decide, you decide. So, the U.S. Olympic Committee does not make a determination. They leave it to each of the individual sport governing bodies, which report into the USOPC, same with the IOC. But this could all be, the only one I think who's been bold enough and right enough to make the right decision at this point is Sebastian Coe, who runs World Athletics, which is the governing body that governs track and field, essentially, for the globe. You also have a conflict sometimes, because what you have is in the U.S., they allow it, men to compete in women's sports. But that means if they qualify for the Olympics in track and field event, they're not going to be allowed to compete there. So it's just the whole thing is a shit show.
And then
basically.
that conversation comes up, oh, they're discriminatory. And you have to have that conversation with somebody. Who's lying to me? The Olympics are lying to me? No, wait. My trainers are lying to me? I don't know. Let's just go with what it used to be.
I would just point out one thing, that the drug testing for an Olympic type or level event is really robust. And there are banned substances that I will tell you are not performance enhancing. I mean, we saw it. What's the woman's name who, couldn't go to the Olympics, not in Paris, but last time because she tested positive for weed. I think we can all agree that that's not a performance enhancing drug. In fact, some would argue it's quite the opposite. There's a Romanian gymnast, this is from many, many years ago at the Olympics, whose medal was taken from her because she tested positive for cold medicine, which I would also argue is not performance enhancing. And yet we seem fine allowing males to take females' gold medals. And by the way, sex provides greater advantage than any drug, even steroids, that an athlete could take. Male advantage is greater than steroid advantage.
You're encroaching on the line of mean here, I'd like to point out.
Mean?
Things are getting mean, yeah. You're getting mean by saying that. Let's do our best to stop that. Update me on what's going on with your company. There was a new ad out a couple weeks ago. What's going on with these girls, their NIL deals? How are they responding to this? How are the parties that we're having, the chips and pop parties? I imagine we're getting together and, flying the female symbol on a flag, running down the hallway. How's the company doing?
Those are funny questions. The company's great. We just turned one. We are building out our own NIL program. We'll basically scoop up any athlete who has the courage to speak up for the protection of their sports. I think, it gives them a real, sense of support and community, which is, what we want to do in some cases, or I guess in every case, but, providing some financial encouragement, I guess, and you're really trying to take the sting out of monetary cancellation, out of the equation. So I think we're up to about 50 athletes in our program at this point. So definitely building it out. It's going great. We're doing great. We're selling lots of stuff. We've sold over 50,000 items in under a year. We just crossed the 1 year mark, but the issue is not solved. It's still in the news. We still have a long way to go, but more and more people are kind of comfortable coming out of the woodwork and supporting this message now. So that's good for business and good for the movement.
Yeah, you're even getting ripped off, which I guess is
Isn't that
in some ways. That's popular enough. But
I thought that was weird. There were knockoffs like 2 days after we launched. So wow. I think there's just like weird little companies that do this, and then you threaten them and you tell them cease and desist because we do own the trademark, and then they do, but they pop up somewhere else. I guess what is the phrase? Flattery is what is it? I can't remember the phrase.
Sincere form. Something is the most sincere form of flattery. Copy.
Yeah, exactly. That. But yeah, there's a lot. It's like whack-a-mole. Once one, goes away, another pops up. But I just tell people, one, if you buy that product, it's not going to be high quality. We're talking like $15 t-shirts. That's not what we sell. And two, you're not actually supporting the movement, because those are just, t-shirt printers. We're actively supporting the athletes. We're supporting organizations, nonprofits that support the cause. So if you want to support the cause, don't buy the knockoff. If you just want a cool t-shirt, I guess, fine.
No, don't do that either. I guess if you don't care about what it is, like if I'm buying like just a shirt that says something random on it that isn't just like somebody's logo, but a lot of people also don't know when you buy from the big online retailers that some companies will purposely make like a cheaper version. Yeah, because they get so much cut on their margin from the large online retailers that I won't note because I use them all the time. But I would suggest, I think that's normal to just go to the website of the person you want to support at this point. I think I miss the days, I talk about this ages me, when you turn on like a computer or something and you go on the internet and you have like your bookmarks you go to. Yeah. I do that for news purposes, but like back in the day, JoeRogan.net, everybody. Shout out JoeRogan.net. I don't think it exists anymore. I think that's so much fun to be able to give the money for the NIL payments with. I know I would enjoy that. And I know the girls must appreciate it. What type of thing? Oh, go ahead. You want to comment on that?
Yeah, no, we also have this thing we call the Courage Wins Award. We set up a fund, a donor-advised fund, and we work with IWF to distribute those funds. And we basically we choose like a woman who has led in this space and really kind of stood up at great risk to herself to take a stand to protect women's sports. So our last winner was Sia Le'e, who was a captain for the University of Nevada Reno volleyball team. Her university did not support her when she led the team to stand down against San Jose State University. And when we called her to tell her she won, and there is a monetary prize that goes along with that, she started crying. And it's like, I mean, tears of joy, not like she wasn't upset. And it really, yeah, it means a lot to be able to do this. But I think the thing that means the most to these girls is just being part of a community that supports them. Because often when they're taking a stand in their own town or community, no one is supporting them. But then they realize, they're brought into the fold, and they have Riley, and they have me, and they have others, Sage Steele and Michelle Tafoya, and all these, strong women who are supporting them, and they're part of a community, and they realize they're not alone.
I didn't know Michelle Tafoya was involved in that. NFL. And I recall hearing that name all through my life.
Yeah.
What happened to San Jose State? Did he graduate? What was his name? Big Blair Fleming. Big badass Blair Fleming. Big Blair beating volleyball women. Did he graduate? He's still there?
Well, I'll tell you, this is what I do know. Brooke Slusser, who was the team captain and the setter, she's still a student. So she's entering, I think she's in her senior year, but she's left campus to finish at home because she was getting harassed so much and bullied and threatened so much on campus, and the university offered no support or protection. So she's left. I mean, it's not good. It's sad, right? Like she's now doing
sarcasm. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
No, that's great. So, she's getting bullied. Actually,
I thought you meant it's great she can finish at home, in the safety of her home. But like, who a senior in college wants to finish college from their parents' basement? Nobody. But she had to do it for her own safety and peace of mind, and it's really unfortunate because San Jose State are cowards and would not basically tell the students to cut it out and leave this girl alone and let her finish college in peace. But she couldn't, so she left. But I don't know where Blair is. I think Blair has 1 year left too.
I'm gonna have to look into that. I'm gonna have to look into those stats.
Yeah, Blair was either a senior or a junior.
I think I remember him being 21, so it could have been either.
Yeah, I think he was a transfer student, just like Brooke. Mm-hmm. So sometimes that sets you back a year.
Allegedly, regardless, hearsay, conjecture, Your Honor, he moved there because there weren't any laws against it. Allegedly, conjecture, Your Honor, hearsay.
Well, it's not just I mean, California loves it.
Yeah, exactly. What do some of the girls that you're working with plan on doing? Do a lot of them show interest in sort of like taking a role in permeating this message or delivering like life lessons, and I say that in a non-sarcastic way, across the country to younger girls? Are a lot of them leaning towards that, or what are some of the things that they're getting into?
Well, most of these young women, they're not going to the Olympics. They're competitive D1 athletes. They're graduating college, and they're trying to figure out what they're going to do next. Like, they have to transition from being an athlete to being like a normal adult human that has a job. And that's a difficult transition. I think it's sometimes more difficult for athletes because you've done this whole thing so intensely your whole life, and then suddenly it's over. So I've had conversations with many of them. A lot of them want to somehow build a career within sports. There's lots of opportunities to do that now. Not just being a Michelle Tafoya on the sidelines, but working for a large sporting organization, professional teams, front of house and back of house jobs, all, sports, journalism, marketing, I mean, on and on. So a lot of them have some interest in that. But many are just trying to figure out what to do next. But they realize at this point they sort of stepped into the spotlight and are role models. And most feel their biggest contribution to the sports community at this point is standing, not their athletic performance, but standing up for the protection of women's sports. So I think they all want to get like regular jobs, but continue to do this too, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think there's room for another sports organization, like a journalist organization in this space. I know there's my page and Outkick, obviously, but in terms of independent, because Outkick's owned by Fox. I don't know if a lot of people know that.
Yeah.
I think there's room in this because, again, I go on ESPN, full-blown lunacy, right? Even sometimes Fox Sports, CBS Sports is okay, but they will allow this stuff to be permeated. The Athletic is insane, like absolutely insane. All these companies, but what we do for Fearless and Blaze, it's it's got to be a little bit more normal, right? And then eventually people will come over and be like, hey, they're not insane. I could just get sports here. And I think that's the goal for a lot of people. So I think there's room for that.
Yeah.
And another thing I wanted to mention was that I recently did an audit of the WNBA, and I found that they could completely eliminate their yearly debt, most of which comes from their private plane usage for no reason, even though they make no money. They spend $25 million a year on that. I think there is room for additional women's professional sports leagues when they act realistic and not without being subsidized by
the
NBA, or in England the Premier League. So I don't know if the person is you, Jennifer, or whoever, to start pushing for hey, we can be not insane. We can not say that everyone's racist in this league and that our owners hate us if they don't pay us more, and still pay pay salaries of $60,000 to $70,000 and make a push towards this, because while there's not the same level of attendance, I think Caitlin Clark has shown, even though I'm not a fan of hers anymore, not that I really was, but after what she did, I'm turning my back figuratively on her.
But you can't deny the appeal that she has.
Exactly. She is obviously the best female basketball player ever. I don't think that's up for debate. And the level that she's able to garner somewhere between 9,000 to 13,000, or maybe on the lower end 7,000 seats, that would be a profitable league. Equivalent to a minor hockey league, the league below the NHL, or the NBA G League or something. And I think women should start pushing for that, if I'm being completely honest, because you can't rely on oh my God, things are so racist, to propel your league to stardom. It just doesn't make any sense. And if I can go on the WNBA websites and be like, hey, don't spend $200,000 a year on activism for birth control for black women only, and which is a thing that they really do, and then don't spend $25 million on private planes for teams that don't make any money. They said one team makes a profit now. Wonderful. I wonder which one that is, by the way, you guys. Then it shouldn't be that hard, and I think you're the woman to do it. You're the woman to start.
Well, that's nice. I don't know if I'm going to do that. There are
will do it.
Teams popping up in cities across the country. Women's professional soccer leagues, they're building stadiums, which could be a mistake for all the reasons you just said in terms of overall profitability. And women's ice hockey, believe it or not, there's professional teams. That is a sport that is on the rise, and there are teams popping up. I think you're right. I think people forget sports is a business, and you have to spend within your means. You don't spend as the women's, as the WNBA team to the level that the men's team spends, because you're not generating the revenue. I don't spend the same on media that Nike spends, because I don't generate $50 billion in revenue, because I'm brand new. So a business, you spend within your means, and then you can kind of grow it over time. Women do themselves no favors by making these ridiculous demands when you're not bringing in the money. So you don't get to be paid the same as the men.
They even got a raise a couple years ago, I'd like to point out. Their minimum salary got upped by 20% or something, still based on $0 brought in. And they're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on race-based activism. They do these media spots. Go ahead.
They need Doge to come in.
Yeah, really. They spend money on basically making themselves appear more popular. So they have money dedicated, I think it was to 12 players in 2023, to give them events, to host events for them. So kind of like a book signing for an author. They held meet and greets for WNBA athletes, and they're spending all this money on it to make them feel better.
Let's play the game. Just play the game and, play it well and don't complain and bring people in. I don't know. I think they could build it into a successful league, though they haven't in all the years it's been in existence. If you just focused on the game, for the love of the game, that's why people like watching Caitlin. Not because she's grandstanding about other issues. They like watching her play actual basketball. Right?
But she had to stop. She bowed.
Okay, set that aside. The reason little girls across the country and their moms and dads like watching her is because of how she plays. It is fun to watch her. I mean, I'm not a huge basketball fan, but I think it's fun to watch her. Yeah, I don't know. I don't feel sorry for Caitlin Clark. I think her deal with Nike is $28 million. She's doing just fine. I'm not real worried about that. Simone Biles is by far the best gymnast that ever walked the face of the earth. There is no professional league in gymnastics, but I think she has $60 million in paid endorsements. She'll do just fine.
Jeez. Let me ask you about that, especially it pertains to gymnastics, and then I'll let you go after that. How important is it, and do you hear the college athletes talking about wanting to remain in college even longer because of these NIL deals? A lot of these female athletes are getting way more money than they'll get in professional leagues and NIL deals. And of course, men's athletes too, when you play in, let's say, like Arkansas or something, or smaller than that, let's say Boise, and then you're getting endorsements from the butcher shop. Like, these are real things. Chocolate milk companies. These are real deals that I've seen. Now you're getting all of a sudden $100,000 a year, and people definitely want to take that fifth year, and they definitely want to expand their social media footprint. Do you think that's harmful that the athletes are pursuing this much money? Because that's what the NCAA defenders will argue, that it's taken away from the sanctity of the game.
No, I don't agree with that. I mean, sorry, I hadn't heard that argument. First of all, athletes in college have often taken fifth years. This is not uncommon at all. Sometimes there's an injury. Sometimes they redshirt the first year. They often get a fifth year. That's not uncommon. I assume you're not talking about more years than the fifth year. Look, forever, the NCAA and the schools themselves made gobs of money off of the backs of these athletes. I'm just fine with them being able to make a little for themselves. I think that's totally fine. Of course, the NCAA doesn't like it because, that money would have gone to them in the past. You have, like, Livy Dunn, maybe is who you're referring to, since gymnastics. She's the gymnast at LSU. I think she's in her fifth year. Maybe she's finishing now. She has been one of the highest money-making NIL athletes. I would argue, I don't think anybody will argue against me on this, it's mostly because she's super hot.
Wow, sexism.
Don't you think that's why? I mean, she is really pretty.
Isn't it just teenage boys that show up to her events?
I don't know, but she's really pretty, and she's got millions and millions of Instagram followers and wears somewhat skimpy outfits, and just to do gymnastics, I mean, you wear one, and look, she's going to be able to continue making money after she leaves. At this point, she has a large enough social media following, and she has enough endorsers from big brands, whether it's Planet Fitness or Viore, that she's going to do just fine for some time to come. She doesn't need to keep competing. In fact, if she were to keep competing, I'd argue that's a detriment to her because she's not as good.
Yeah, I was going to say that because she could lose and it would take like the aura away.
Yeah. Although the hot aura remains.
Well, that's I forget who I spoke to about that. That it is like smart, whether that's the reason they're popular or not, is to get a popularity so you can parlay into something. I wouldn't always advise podcasting like some of them have done because they don't have much to say. But you have to get the money when you can get it, and I agree. The NCAA made cajillions of dollars for so long, and like, how dare you ask for money? That would be like, there's stories about people going to sign autographs for $200 and getting fined by the NCAA for accepting money for their name, and it's like,
I know.
Sorry about that. But the Australian punter who was at East Carolina, I forget who he just got signed by. Sorry, Luke Larson. I torment him with voice notes in an Australian accent all the time. Hey, how you doing, Luke? How's you doing over there? He said that he doesn't think the athletes should be paid, and I think the reason for that is because he knows he's not going to be professional. I think he might. I think he could be a professional punter, but he has always planned his life to not be a professional athlete. He came to college at like 27 years old or something from Australia, so he's never really had that goal to be a professional athlete. And I think he sort of set out his life to not be dependent on that. But I think I disagree with him on that. But he says, I don't think we should be paid because it takes away from the game, and that's the argument I was trying to.
Okay, I'll just. Can I say one thing before I go? So I'm old enough to remember. I don't know if you're old enough to remember, but if you were, this is outside of NCAA and college rules. If you were going to compete in the Olympics or the Olympic movement and make it to the Olympics, you could not be paid for your sport at all. You could not. That. So I'm not sure when this rule ended. And, oftentimes people who won the Olympics would then leave the sport and gain lucrative endorsement deals. Mary Lou Retton on the Wheaties box and Bruce Jenner, now Caitlyn, on the Wheaties box. Like that was like the end all be all deal. But, and in gymnastics, that was sort of fine because the girls are teenagers, so they weren't going to work anyway. But if you're a track and field athlete, or there's a lot of athletes, they're like grown-ups with families, and they're not allowed to make money off of competing in their sport. And that included endorsement deals, which is, I think, insane. And, the argument was exactly what you're describing. Oh, this is about the love of sport and the love of the game, and that corrupts it. No, it's just a person trying to make a living.
I don't know if I'm old enough to specifically remember that. I'm digging deep, and the thing that keeps coming to mind is Michael Phelps smoking a bong is the one that keeps coming to mind for me.
That's different.
Michael Johnson and Donovan Bailey comes to mind.
Well, Michael Johnson, so that's a good example because this is post. So he ran in those gold Nike sneakers, right? So right?
Right.
And he won in the gold Nike sneakers, you remember? And he won the 200 and the 100, right?
Oh, Donovan Bailey won the 100.
Okay, the 200 and the 400. He won two.
I don't remember. I'm not American.
Okay, fine. I don't remember either, but he won two races, and it was sort of an unusual combo, and he ran in these gold Nikes that were kind of amazing. He was sponsored by Nike. He was making money off of his endorsement with Nike while training as an adult person to train and win in the Olympics. Like, otherwise, what are you supposed to do? Go to your temp job for 8 hours and then train? Like, how are you supposed to support yourself? These are adults. So the whole rule, I think, was stupid and weird. And how does that corrupt the sport just because an adult is permitted to make a living off of their, accomplishments in the sport? So that rule, that changed. I don't remember when, but it changed. And it's not been corrupted. There is corruption in the Olympic movement that is usually from the USOPC, the Olympic Committee, and the International Olympic Committee. That's where the corruption comes from, usually not the athletes. So pay them is what I say.
Donovan Bailey, Michael Johnson got together in the Sky Dome in Toronto, 100 meter and the 200 meter winners, to run for 150 meters, and Donovan Bailey was beating him, and Michael Johnson pulled up Jennifer.
Is this real?
You know it. Yes. He pulled up, he faked a hamstring injury, we all know it, and then Donovan Bailey called him a wimp afterwards.
Wow.
Fact, history, Canadian history.
He won 200 and 400.
What about... No, that'll take way too long. I was going to talk about... Who was the guy, Carl Lewis, when they were on a lot of steroids?
Can I just tell you, so Carl Lewis is from, you're going way back. Your listeners do not know who Carl Lewis is, or his sister, Carol.
I was barely alive anyways, it's fine. If you're a sports fan, you know.
Okay, he was a long jumper. He probably did other events, but he was sort of known for long jump. And he was from the town where I trained in New Jersey, Willingboro, New Jersey. His dad was the track coach at his high school and used to come to our gym and,
a lot of
train us.
There, or?
What's that?
A lot of Italians? A lot of good subs and pizzas.
Oh, yeah. Steak sandwiches, hoagies. We call them hoagies in Jersey. But he would come to our gym to try to teach us to run faster, and he really did not love me because I was not a very fast person. Anyway, what about Carl Lewis?
I was just saying how there was a Canadian thing with that too, because Carl Lewis ended up getting the gold, I think, because Ben Johnson was caught for steroids, but they were all on lots of steroids, and there's a documentary about that. And then, if we want to go even deeper, Ben Johnson, the Canadian guy, my dad said he owed him like $3,000 for working on his house, and he never paid. Allegedly, but that's what my dad said.
There was a lot of doping and drugs in the 80s, a ton, which is when Carl Lewis was running and winning. There was a ton. The Russian athletes, the East German athletes, the swimmers, the East German gymnasts and Russian gymnasts. There was a ton of, that was like just straight up steroids. That was sort of before the blood doping craze.
That's crazy too when you actually learn about what they were doing, the cyclists. Blew my mind when I first read about it. First, you hear it and you just think, oh, he was on steroids. But no, like measuring the lactic acid and stuff in your leg muscle.
Well, people, so I have one fun story about this. Then I really am going to go. So there was a doctor. He was our doctor in Allentown, Pennsylvania, where I trained as a gymnast. Dr. Dixon. He's no longer alive. In Allentown, Pennsylvania, which is like a podunk town in Pennsylvania, there was a great gymnastics training center, but they also had the velodrome for cycling. And so Dr. Dixon was also the doctor for the U.S. cycling team at the time. And he first came up with this idea of blood doping. Very ethical doctor who also would come to my gym and shoot me up with cortisone as a minor all the time with no parental consent. So he came up with this idea of doping because it was undetectable. They're just putting more blood so you can oxygenate more, and have more endurance, essentially. That's the very rudimentary and like dumb person's explanation of what it is, but it was not detectable in the system because it's not a foreign substance. It's not a drug. It's not anabolic steroids. It's just more blood.
See, this
creepy.
This is even more in depth than I knew. We're gonna have to do a steroid podcast in a couple months or whatever. But I'll come with my list of questions, my list of people who are my favorite steroid users, most likely baseball and UFC fighters.
Barry Bonds.
Answer for them. Wow, Barry Bonds, really? You think Barry Bonds was on something?
Can you do me a favor if we do that? Can you send me some questions ahead of time so I can be a little? No,
I can't do that. I mean,
I don't know I don't know anything about baseball.
It's about the drugs, really. But yeah,
well, they're bad.
I'll just send you the list of names. On a de-escalating scale of skull sizes, we'll go like Barry Bonds, The Rock. I don't know who else is a large skull. Mark McGuire. So much HGH. We could get onto an HGH tangent. My dad said that's very expensive. My dad always wanted to be when I say my dad, I think I need to preemptively tell you he's a 5'4"-ish French guy who looks like Super Mario, who wished he was a bodybuilder. And so he'd be watching like sports with me. We'd be watching WWF or something. He'd be like, Andrew, look at that guy's traps. Look at the size of his delts. I'd be like, Dad, I just want to watch the sport. And that's all he cared about. Delts and traps. That's all it was.
Well, if we're going to talk about steroids, we've got to talk about it in women's track and field. There's been doping there too.
Marion Jones?
Yep.
Okay, I'm just going to keep saying names and be like, answer for this.
It was Marion Jones. She argues she didn't know. I believe
none of us know when needles go into our bodies. It's just you're just in a stasis lock where people come in and feed you through tubes and inject us.
Just shoot you at
XXXY. Thanks again for doing this. Have a wonderful weekend.
You too. Thanks, Andrew.